A man crouches behind a ridge watching a rival tribe's camp in the valley below. 30 people, maybe 40. They killed his brother last season over a watering hole. He doesn't understand the device he's carrying. He doesn't need to. He rolls it down the slope, walks away, and 7 seconds later, a white flash erases the valley, the camp, the river, and every living thing within 2 kilometers. 40,000 years before Hiroshima, the first mushroom cloud rises over the ancient world. No one who sees it understands what just happened, including him. Ancient humans have nuclear weapons. That's the only rule we're changing. Everything else, physics, biology, history, stays exactly where it is. No modern infrastructure, no electricity, no radiation science, no hospitals, no Geneva Convention. Just Paleolithic tribes, stone tools, animal skins, and functional nuclear warheads sitting in a world that has absolutely no framework to survive them. The first thing that kills people isn't the blast, it's the ignorance. After the Hiroshima detonation in 1945, survivors walked back into the hypocenter within hours looking for family. They drank from contaminated wells, they carried irradiated debris home, and those were people living in a modern industrial society with radios, newspapers, and at least some concept of invisible poisons. Ancient humans would have none of that. Zero. A Paleolithic hunter sees a massive explosion wipe out a rival group. What does he do? He walks toward it. He picks through the wreckage for tools, for food, for weapons. He drinks from the river downstream. He brings objects home to his family. Acute radiation syndrome, vomiting. What happens to the air? What happens to the food chain? What happens to a species that, at this point in history, numbers fewer than 10 million on the entire Earth? Let's go. Now forget strategy for a second. Start with the body because the body is where this scenario becomes obviously unsurvivable. A modern nuclear weapon, even a small one, 15 kilotons, roughly the size of the Hiroshima bomb, produces a fireball with a core temperature of roughly 100 million degrees Celsius. Within a half-kilometer radius, a human body doesn't burn. It evaporates. The thermal pulse travels outward at the speed of light. At 1 kilometer, exposed skin receives third-degree burns. At 2 kilometers, clothing ignites. Ancient humans wore animal hides. Animal hides are fuel. Then comes the blast wave. Overpressure at 1 kilometer from a 15-kiloton detonation exceeds 6 pounds per square inch. That's enough to collapse a modern brick building. Ancient shelters, lean-tos, hide tents, cave mouths would offer essentially zero protection, and the human body itself fails at surprisingly low overpressure. Eardrums rupture at around 5 pounds per square inch. Lungs begin to hemorrhage at roughly 30. Anyone standing within 800 meters of the detonation is dead from the blast wave alone, even if they somehow survived the heat. But the silent killer is radiation. Gamma rays and neutrons flood outward from the fireball in the first second. An unshielded human at 1 kilometer absorbs a lethal dose almost instantly. And here's the critical difference between ancient and modern exposure. Modern victims at Hiroshima had hospitals, IV fluids, blood transfusions, antibiotics for the secondary infections that radiation damage invites. Ancient humans would have none of these. Every survivable dose in the modern world becomes a fatal dose in the ancient one. The threshold for death drops dramatically when your best medical intervention is a poultice made from river clay. Now think about what daily life looks like for the survivors. Not the people at ground zero. They're gone. The people 30, 40, 50 kilometers away who saw the flash, felt the tremor, and now have to keep living. The immediate problem is water. A single 15-kiloton ground burst, and ancient humans, not understanding airburst optimization, would almost certainly detonate on the ground. Produces massive quantities of radioactive fallout. Soil, rock, and debris are sucked into the fireball, irradiated and scattered downwind. The Castle Bravo test in 1954 contaminated over 18,000 square kilometers of ocean. A ground burst in a river valley would poison the watershed for years, and ancient humans are entirely dependent on surface water. There are no wells, no filtration systems, no alternative supply chains. If your river is contaminated, You either drink from it and die slowly, or you leave and try to find water elsewhere, which means crossing into another tribe's territory. Food is the same problem. Fallout settles on plants, animals eat the plants, humans eat the animals. Bioaccumulation of radioactive isotopes, particularly strontium-90 and cesium-137, concentrates up the food chain. A modern study published in the Journal of Environmental Radioactivity found that deer in the Chernobyl exclusion zone still carry cesium levels above safe consumption thresholds nearly 40 years after the meltdown. Ancient humans, eating wild game from irradiated land with no concept of contamination, would be ingesting concentrated radioactive material with every meal. The cancers would come later. The acute poisoning would come first. And then there's the psychological damage no one talks about. These are people who explain the world through spirits, animal gods, natural forces, a weapon that produces a second sun, kills at a distance, and then poisons the land invisibly for years afterward. This doesn't fit into any existing framework of understanding. Anthropologists who study deep trauma in oral tradition cultures note that unexplainable catastrophic events often produce permanent behavioral and spiritual ruptures. Entire belief systems collapse. Social cohesion fractures. People stop trusting the ground they walk on, the water they drink, the sky above them. And they're right not to. Here's where it stops being a survival story and starts being an extinction story. In the ancient world, total human population was small. Estimates vary, but most archaeologists place the global population at between 5 and 10 million around 10,000 BC. These people were not evenly distributed. They clustered around water sources, fertile valleys, coastal zones, and migration corridors. The exact places a nuclear weapon would be used, because those are the places worth fighting over. Now, consider the mathematics. A single 15-kiloton weapon kills nearly everyone within a 2-kilometer radius and seriously injures people out to 5. But the fallout zone from a ground burst can extend over 1,000 square kilometers depending on wind patterns. In a world of 5 million people clustered in small pockets, a handful of detonations doesn't just kill thousands, it renders entire regions uninhabitable. The Fertile Crescent, the Nile Delta, the Indus Valley, the exact cradles of future civilization, gone. Not destroyed in the dramatic sense, poisoned, emptied, made unlivable for decades. And there is no recovery infrastructure. When Hiroshima was destroyed, Japan had a functioning national government, international aid, supply chains, construction crews, and medical systems. It still took years. Ancient humans have none of that. A tribe that loses its territory to contamination doesn't rebuild. It fragments. Small groups scatter into marginal land, desert edges, high altitudes, dense forest, places that can barely support human life under normal conditions. Infant mortality, already brutally high in the Paleolithic period, would spike. Genetic diversity, already fragile in small populations, would crash. Geneticists estimate that the human species already passed through at least one severe population bottleneck around 70,000 years ago, possibly dropping below 15,000 individuals. Nuclear weapons in the ancient world wouldn't create a bottleneck. They'd create a wall. And now the part that decides everything. Modern nuclear deterrence works, to the extent it works at all, because of a single concept: mutually assured destruction. Both sides know that using nuclear weapons means both sides die. This requires communication, intelligence, second strike capability, and rational institutional decision-making. Ancient humans have none of these things. A Paleolithic tribe doesn't know who else has nuclear weapons. It doesn't know how many exist. It has no diplomats, no ambassadors, no hotline. The only rational strategy from a game theory perspective is to use your weapon first, immediately before the other side uses theirs. This is what nuclear strategists call the use it or lose it problem, and it's the single most dangerous dynamic in nuclear theory. In the modern world, we've built elaborate systems to prevent it. Early warning networks, submarine-based second strikes, arms control treaties. In the ancient world, there is nothing. Every tribe with a weapon has an overwhelming incentive to strike first and strike now. And the targets aren't military installations. They're villages. They're gathering sites. They're places where women and children cluster while hunters range outward. The lethality isn't strategic. It's total. A single 15-kiloton weapon used against a Paleolithic settlement doesn't degrade a military capability. It erases a genetic line. Multiply this across the planet, dozens of tribes, dozens of weapons, no communication between them, no shared language, no concept of escalation control. What you get isn't a war. It's a species-wide suicide carried out in slow motion over a few generations by groups who can't talk to each other and have no reason to stop. Now let's be honest about what we don't know. We don't know exactly how many weapons it would take to trigger a nuclear winter in the ancient atmosphere. Modern models from researchers like Alan Robach at Rutgers suggest that as few as 100 Hiroshima-sized weapons could inject enough soot into the stratosphere to drop global temperatures by several degrees for a decade. But those models assume modern cities burning. Ancient landscapes would produce different fuel loads, different soot quantities, different atmospheric effects. The principle holds: enough detonations would darken the sky and crash global temperatures. But the exact threshold is genuinely uncertain. What isn't uncertain is that ancient humans, with no agriculture, no food storage, and no shelter technology beyond animal hides and caves, would survive a nuclear winter far less effectively than modern humans would. And modern humans probably wouldn't survive it either. Here's the thing no one considers. Everyone assumes the danger is the explosion, the fireball, the shockwave, the immediate death toll. But the real extinction mechanism is much quieter. It's the fallout in the water. It's the cesium in the deer. It's the slow poisoning of every river, valley, and coastal plain that humans depend on for survival. Nuclear weapons don't need to kill every human on Earth directly. They just need to make enough of the livable Earth unlivable. And in the ancient world, with a population of 5 to 10 million spread across a few hundred viable habitats, you don't need many detonations to close those habitats permanently. The weapons don't kill humanity. They kill the places where humanity is possible. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. We act like nuclear weapons are a modern problem, a product of 20th century physics and great power rivalry. But the underlying dynamic hasn't changed at all. We are still tribal. We still fight over water, territory, and resources. We still struggle to communicate across language and cultural barriers. We still face the use it or lose it incentive every single day. The only thing standing between us and the ancient scenario isn't wisdom, it's infrastructure. Treaties, hotlines, satellites, second strike submarines. Remove those through war, through collapse, through political failure. And we are right back in the cave, holding a weapon we barely understand, watching the valley below, making a calculation no human being should ever have to make. A man crouches behind a ridge, watching the valley. He doesn't understand the device he's carrying. He doesn't need to. That part hasn't changed either. But there's a version of this where the weapons don't matter, because what if humans were already the most dangerous weapon on the planet? 10 times stronger, bare hands, no technology needed. That's next.